I'm a 6'7" male in Australia. I'd like to think I'm a fairly tough and intimidating guy. But some of the stuff that used to go on at the mall I used to work the night shift for still gives me goosebumps to this day. So the mall I worked at was the largest in my state, I'd say. And all the way up at about 8:30 p.m. it would still be quite busy. Only around 9:30 would we manage to usher all of the stragglers out, and only at about 11 p.m. would all of the business owners have left. My job was basically to patrol the mall and make sure that there was no one sticking around after the doors were closed during the night. We didn't have weapons or batons, only a can of mace that was very rarely used. There were multiple occasions where we would find would-be thieves hiding around trying to break into shops after dark, but they were normally far outnumbered by the 4 or 5 of us on shift at a time, and they would usually be intimidated by me or some of the other imposing members of security. This one night though, shit started really getting weird for me on the night shift. So I'd say it was about 2 o'clock and I was standing in the middle of the empty food court eating a sandwich. This was the only part of the mall that had any light at nighttime due to the skylight, so it was comfortable to eat there. While I was eating though, I heard a dull scraping noise from the hallway leading off from the food courts into some toilets. It sounded like a piece of metal dragging across the floor. I was immediately put on edge and I flicked on my flashlight without a moment of hesitation. I can remember creeping down the hallway, flashlight in hand, illuminating a good 6 or 7 meters in front of me. As I got closer and closer to the end of the hall, the noise became louder and louder, until I was at the end of the hallway, and there was the toilet doors to the left and right of me. I could tell the sound was coming from the female toilets though. I gripped the handle and opened the door a tiny little crack. The noise was now very clear, and had me not scared, but confused. I yelled, "Boy, who is in there?" The noise quickly stopped. I paused a moment, listening hard through the tiny crack of the door, and I swear I could hear breathing. Low, male breathing. I shut the door, still gripping the handle tightly, and flicked on my radio. "This is 1-3. I need help in food court bathrooms. I think someone's here." No response. This was really strange, and it put me further on edge. Policy was to always answer the radio, and now I was truly becoming quite alarmed. "This is 1-3. Does anyone copy?" Still no response. I can remember whispering to myself, "What the actual fuck?" I again opened the door a tiny crack. "Listen, mate," I said, sounding as intimidating as possible. "If you don't fucking come out with your hands up, you're going to end up eating your teeth tonight. Do you want that?" I sat there at the door, quite honestly terrified at this point, but there was no response. In fact, now there was no noise at all. I yelled into the bathroom, "Okay, mate, I'm coming in. If you do anything stupid, it's not my fault you'll never walk again." I tried my hardest to sound scary, but my voice was quivering at this point. This whole situation made no sense at all. Why would someone be in the female bathrooms? What was the metal noise? What the fuck is even happening? I very slowly opened the door, and scanned my flashlight slowly across the room. All the cubicles were open, but other than that, the room was totally empty. I was totally shitting myself about now. I was definitely losing it. I walked into the center of the bathroom, closing the door behind me. Scared to the core, I let out a faint, "This is some horror movie shit, eh? Come out," when I heard the long, whining squeak of the door behind me. I span around, basically crying at this point, and shone my torch on a fucking massive man. At least a head taller than me, or so it seemed in my state at the time. He was Caucasian, and at least in his 40s with matte gray hair all over his forehead. He was mid-opening the door, but he stopped dead in the middle of his action. He just looked at me, smiling this guilty fucking smile like a kid would make when he got caught stealing biscuits or some shit like that. I'm not going to lie, I was so scared I froze. He lifted his finger up to his mouth. "Shh," before swinging the door open all the way, and sprinting out with what looked like some type of small metal box in his hand. Turns out he was just behind the toilet door when I was opening it, and I totally missed him. I was so fucking close to him, and I didn't even fucking notice him. He could have killed me if he had a knife or something, and that thought still haunts me to this day. Later that night, my radio miraculously started working again. and I got right on to telling my coworkers about my story. They collectively went pale when I told them what happened. They all had similar stories, but none that were as much of a close shave as mine. I worked the night shift for another week after that before I quit. I'm not sticking around in a job like that. I needed help, and for some reason my radio fucked itself. Why? So, weird old guy in the toilets? Let's not meet again.
I had just finished my first year of university, and I had taken up a position as a taxi dispatcher with my boyfriend's cousin's taxi company. For the first week and a half, I worked mainly day shifts until the owner decided to extend the hours to 24/7, and I was the lucky employee who would be covering 3 or 4 of these shifts a week. The next week, I was working my first night shift alone. The driver would be out all night looking for fares, which meant a lot of the night would be just me. I wasn't uneasy working such a shift by myself since I had worked at a 24-hour coffee shop and was used to midnight shifts. It was also a Wednesday or Thursday night, so it wasn't very busy. The best part about this job was that my boss let me use the internet to play video games on my laptop in the office. From the computer desk in the office, I could see the front door, a portion of the front desk, and most of the front windows, so I could keep a close eye on what was happening outside. Plus, the bell above the door always alerted me to a new customer so I wouldn't be caught off guard if I got too into my game. On this particular night, I was working with a taxi driver named Dave. Dave is about 6'3" and 300 pounds, plus he suffers from several health problems, one of which made all of his movements slow and painful. He definitely wasn't Mr. Fitness or the type of person who would be able to defend themselves or others very easily. Sometime during the early hours of the morning, around 1:30 to 2 a.m., Dave gets a call to go pick up someone in a town 15 minutes away. He gathered up his stuff and drove into the night, while I headed into the office and continued playing my video game. Around 15 minutes later, I caught something over the top of my laptop. My mind froze. I could hear panting, and in the reflection of the window, I could hear someone sitting in one of the waiting chairs. I walked to the doorway that connects the front door with the office. I glanced into the sitting area and nearly shit bricks. Some guy with a massive rat tail had managed to ninja his way into the office, and was now sitting in one of the chairs with his face buried in his hands, panting heavily. He was dirty, sweaty, and sounded like he had just run a marathon. Now, the rat tail should have tipped me off, but I found it more hilarious than frightening. A few moments passed, and I finally got up the courage to ask him if he needed a cab. He didn't respond at first. I asked him again, and he looks up at me. I took a step back into the office. His face was scratched and covered in blood from the wound on the top of his head. I was in shock and immediately offered assistance to him. He replies with, "I'm fine. I don't need no help. I just want to go home." I asked him if he needed a cab, and if so, where was he going? He told me that he lives about 20 minutes away and wants Dave to take him home. After that, shit started to get weird. I called over to Dave using the radio to tell him that there was a fare in the office and that he wanted a ride. He told me that it would be another 10 minutes. My hand was on the phone the entire time in case this guy made any sudden movements. Instead of going back into the office, I decided it was best to stay out front where there are 2 great big bay windows that would make it easy to see what is happening inside the taxi office. I didn't feel as though he was a threat at all, but he seemed really angry at something, so I wanted to make sure that if something happened to me, people would be able to see it. So I walked out into the front room, and as I get closer to the gentleman, that's when I see it. He's not just bleeding from the head, but from the shoulder and knee. I ask him again if he's okay, then I offer to call an ambulance for him. Bad idea. "You don't need to be doing that," he told me. "It ain't like I killed nobody, right? I never killed nobody. Don't go doing that. You don't need to call anyone. I just want to go home." "I'm sorry. I just noticed that you are bleeding pretty badly and thought maybe you'd like someone to make sure you're okay," I replied. "I didn't kill nobody. That asshole should have kept his mouth shut. He had what was coming to him. He shouldn't have said those things. But it ain't like I killed nobody. You don't need to call nobody. I just want to go home. Okay, I tell him, but you're bleeding. It ain't like I killed nobody, he replied. I swear I didn't kill nobody. Please don't call the cops. I don't need the cops. I just need to go home. I didn't kill anyone. Silence for a few minutes. He notices the phone clutched in my hand. I fell down, he blurted out. Pardon? I fell, he repeated. That's why I am bleeding. I fell. It ain't like I killed nobody. He got up and started pacing. He was growing impatient for his cab, and I was scared shitless. Blood was now on the chair and floor. I had the phone in my hand, and every once in a while he broke the silence with another string of incoherent babbling about how he had done nothing wrong because he hadn't killed anyone, and that I didn't need to call the cops because he was a good guy. Eventually, Dave radios over that he's about 2 minutes away, and I breathed a sigh of relief. He pulled up out front. The man gets into the car, and they drive off. Now I'm worried for Dave, so I called the cops. I reported what happened, and they followed the taxi cab to this guy's house and where they arrested him. Turns out this guy had run away from a nearby bar after he had physically assaulted a fellow patron, injured him with a sharp object, took off running, fell and managed to find his way to the taxi office. During his time in the cab office, the police had been searching for him. So technically no, he didn't kill anyone, but he did assault and attempt to kill someone. I also found out that one of the other drivers, Steven, knew the guy from high school years ago. His name is Duke, and he has a history of violence. He also has a history of coming home drunk and cracking his wife's skull open from time to time. Whether he had planned to that night, I couldn't say, but I am just glad that the guy ended up in the drunk tank for the night. His wife was unharmed, and the guy who got stabbed didn't die. At least, I assume he didn't, since I didn't see Duke from every now and then, walking the streets with his glorious rat tail, which means he didn't get arrested. This happened a few years ago to me when I was still living in my childhood home down in California. I had just inherited my family home, so my cousin decided to move in with my husband and I while she was attending a college nearby. My cousin and I were both working at the Lego store at the time, but I only worked mornings and my husband and cousin worked nights, so there were many nights where I was alone. A couple of weeks before this happened, I had been taking stuff out to my car when I realized the strange brown van with no black windows parked across the street. As I put the stuff in the trunk, the man in the van started making weird noises at me. I turned to see if I could get a look at his face, but his black Giants baseball cap was pulled down really far. Thinking he was just a creepy guy, I flipped him off and went back into the house. About 2 hours later, I went outside to go somewhere, and he was still parked across the street. Not thinking anything of it, I hopped in my car and headed to my friend's house. As I was driving, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw the same brown van following me. I turned on a whole bunch of streets, and he followed me down all of them. I turned onto the road that my father-in-law lived on and parked, thinking if the guy tried anything, I could just run there and be safe. When I pulled over in front of my father-in-law's house, the van slowly drove by. I looked into the van, and the man put his hand into a gun position, pointed at me, and said "bang" really loudly. After that, he hauled ass and drove off. Now, I had always been a little leery of staying home alone. My house had always given me the creeps because of how poorly lit it was. When I was alone at night, I usually just stayed in the kitchen because of how bright it was. I was watching a TV show on my computer when all of a sudden I hear a banging on the front door and the handle jiggling. It startled me for a moment until I looked at the time and saw it was around 10 p.m. and knew my cousin was going to be coming home soon from work about that time. I got up and opened the door, but nobody was on the porch. I shouted my cousin's name out, but still no response. I called my cousin's cell, and immediately she was like, "Oh hey, I'm on my way home from work right now." Before I could say anything else, There were 3 extremely loud bangs on the door that connected the kitchen and the garage, and the knob was shaken violently. I slammed the front door closed, locked and chained it, and ran for my room. My aunt called me while my cousin called the police, and I stayed under a blanket until my cousin arrived. When she came and got me, I was led outside to talk to the police. I was trying to explain what had happened, but the officers along the side of my house were distracting me. I walked over to where they were, but one of the police officers held me back. They opened the gate and saw that the door to my garage, which we always leave locked, was wide open. All of the officers in the area pulled out their weapons and went into the garage, but nobody was in there. Afterwards, the police told me that it was probably just some kids messing around. But if I ever get scared at home, to just call them and they'll send someone out. About a week later, I was watching something in my living room with my cousin and my husband. As I was passing by the window next to my front door, I realized there was a guy wearing the same baseball cap as the guy in the van standing outside on the sidewalk, staring at the house. When he noticed me watching, he immediately locked eyes with me and slowly gave me the creepiest smile I had ever seen. I turned and yelled for my husband to go out there, but when I turned around, he was gone. I will say though that the baseball cap in question was really generic. And a lot of Giants fans wear it, so I can't say it was the same exact guy, but it felt like it was. 3 days after that, I was home alone at night again. I was on edge, but I was trying to ignore it, telling myself that I was going to be okay. I was baking cookies in the kitchen when I thought I heard a knock at my sliding glass door. My whole body tensed up, and I slowly turned towards the door. The lights in the backyard were off, and the kitchen ones were on, so the glare on the window made it impossible to see if someone was outside. Everything was silent for a few seconds before someone banged on the door again. I screamed, but felt paralyzed in fear. The person ran on the deck from the sliding glass door to the 2 windows in the living room and started knocking on them as well. They came back to the sliding glass door to knock, and started trying to open the door. I finally came to my senses, grabbed my keys, and ran outside into my car. I locked myself in my car and dialed 911. We sold our house shortly after that. I still have a hard time staying home alone, even though I'm 2 states away now. When I was 14, I was asked to babysit my 3 younger cousins, aged 8, 4, and 1, in an extremely rural, mountainous part of Pennsylvania. My aunt and uncle had a wedding to go to over an hour away and wouldn't be back until very late. Their house was situated on a steep mountainside. Their back deck had a 15-foot drop onto a rocky hill below leading down to a river. Their closest neighbors were about a half a mile away. The closest main road was a mile away, and at night there were no lights to be seen anywhere around them. Basically, it was in the middle of nowhere, and you would have to know where you're going to get there. You don't just accidentally end up there. My aunt and uncle left us with some pizza and their cell phone number next to their landline. This was the early 2000s, and I didn't have a cell phone. But even if I did, I wouldn't get reception there anyway, and headed out. The baby was already asleep. The 4-year-old wasn't feeling well and was quietly watching TV in the living room as he dozed off, and the 8-year-old was playing Guitar Hero with me up on the loft. The loft overlooked the living room to the left, where I could keep an eye on the 4-year-old, and there was a huge window that overlooked the driveway to the right. This description of the driveway is an important detail to the story. The road that led to their house ran straight into their forked driveway. It was a dead-end road. The house was as far as you could go. Go to the left driveway. There is a large open carport, and that's where my aunt and uncle and anyone who ever visited parked. The right driveway led down a very short but very steep hill to a large leveled out area, and ended against the garage door that opened to the basement of the house. It was never used as a garage, but served as my uncle's man cave, and where he spent most of his time. Right beside the garage door, a normal door with a window so you could see right in. But this driveway was exclusively used by the kids as a play area because it was the only flat yard-like area on the property, and being on the mountainside, There isn't much room to safely play otherwise. No cars ever drove down there. Ever. There are too many toys and bikes in the way, and friends and family knew this. It was about 10 p.m., pitch black outside. No moon to illuminate the area either. My cousin and I were still playing Guitar Hero when headlights caught the corner of my eye. And not my aunt's minivan headlights. Huge truck headlights with those roof lights you often see on Jeeps or other off-road trucks. Not only that, the truck was going down the right driveway, the kids' play area. This was not my aunt and uncle. This was not anyone they knew. Panic and dread filled my body. I was a small teenage girl, alone in an isolated house, on a mountain at night, with 3 children in my care. In a terrified voice, I asked my cousin, "Who is that?" "Jake, do you know whose truck that is?" And then he looked panicked. "No, I've never seen that truck before," he replied. I quickly ushered him downstairs, still unsure what to do, but the 2 little ones were sleeping down there, and I wanted to make sure they were safe. I checked on the baby and then grabbed the phone to call 911, and then I started to hear the metal garage door being shaken violently. No one ever opened that garage door. More panic fills me. I hear them try the door beside it, the metal doorknob jiggling. No one was actually knocking. It's not like they were checking to see if my uncle was down there. Plus, the lights were out. It was dark down there. They knew no one was down there. They were definitely breaking in. The door leading to the basement steps was right next to the phone, so I could clearly hear all of this going on. I quickly turned the little lock on the doorknob just in case they did make it into the basement. My heart was practically jumping out of my chest. I'm talking to the 911 dispatcher as my 8-year-old cousin clings to my arm. The operator is calm and trying to calm me, but I knew it would be at least 30 minutes until a police officer could get up there, assuming they didn't get totally lost on this mountainside in the pitch dark. I just kept thinking, we are fucked. We are dead. This is how I die. The operator asked for the number my aunt and uncle left me so she could have another dispatcher call them to let them know the situation. I turned around to grab the paper with the number on it, and to my absolute horror, I see a man peering in the large sliding glass door. A huge, burly, what had to have been a 6'4" man with long scraggly red hair and a big red bushy beard. And what made it worse, he was grinning at me. Grinning in a way that still scares me to this day. Meanwhile, I had to have looked like a terrified deer in the headlights. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. There was a second man behind him I couldn't see as well. I had no idea what he looked like, but he was equally as tall, but a bit more lanky than the larger man at the sliding glass door. I screamed, "Oh God, they're here," and before the 911 operator can say anything, my 8-year-old cousin goes, "Mr. Jim?" His voice was very confused. It wasn't like my cousin was happy or even relieved to see him. I asked, "You know who that is?" But before my cousin can answer, I turned my attention to the man in the door. "I'm on the phone with the police," I shouted. I'm grateful he didn't try that door, because I don't think it was locked. The man stared at me hard for a moment, eyebrows furrowed, like deciding what he wanted to do next. But he then just backed away into the darkness. What seemed like an eternity later, I saw the truck lights back out of the driveway and then back down the road until they disappeared. I was still scared shitless, and so was my cousin. He had only met that guy a few times, an acquaintance of his dad. It wasn't like it was a close family friend, and obviously, because again, he went down the wrong driveway. Visitors never go down that way. The 911 operator asked for a description of the man, then told me they'd gotten in touch with my aunt and uncle and they were on their way home. She stayed on the phone with me until a police officer showed up a bit later to make sure the men were gone, and they stayed with us until my aunt and uncle got home so that they can ask them some questions. My uncle was furious, not at me for calling them home early, but at this Mr. Jim guy. He muttered something like, "I'm going to fuck him up." My aunt was mad at my uncle and told him to tell Jim to never come back again. I didn't know at the time, but my uncle had a drug problem. I didn't know what Mr. Jim or his accomplice were doing, or what they would have done if I wasn't on the phone with the police. But that grin was not a friendly one. It was sinister. And again, he also had to have known my uncle was not there, because the basement was dark. He would have seen through the windowed basement door. He had also tried lifting the garage door, something not even my uncle did. He intended to break into the basement. That much is clear to me. There is no other explanation. I never did babysit for them again, and I don't think I ever even went back up there because not long after, my aunt divorced my uncle and moved out. I sat on a wooden bar stool behind the register in the nastiest gas station I've seen before or since. It was my third night in a row on the graveyard shift. Despite my constant pleas for daylight hours, at night, the place became purgatory. No matter how you'd scrub or how many times you'd mop, a thick film of filth remained on every surface. I would go hours without seeing a single car drive past. I often questioned if the rapture happened and I was the only one left. We were a stone's throw from another 24-hour gas station franchise that was cleaner, properly lit, and had an equipment update within the last decade. Needless to say, I had a lot of downtime. It was midnight. I had 6.5 hours to kill. I was reading from the first volume of Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, and doing my best not to look at the clock. As I would soon learn, I was being irresponsibly unaware of what was going on around me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a brown wood panel station wagon pull up to a pump. 2 men exited the car and walked inside. One looked older. He was wearing a leather jacket the same shade of brown as his vehicle. The younger guy was close to my age. He wore a faded Carhartt coat and work boots. Both were covered in a layer of dirt or dust that suggested recent manual labor. These were country gentlemen. I greeted them and asked what I could help them with. They told me they're not interested in buying anything, but they had to stop by and make sure everything was okay here. I was appreciative, albeit visibly confused. The younger man asked me, "Did you know you're being watched?" As he subtly gestured outside, sure enough, I saw the dark outline of a man standing completely motionless near a streetlight. None of his features were visible, but I could tell he was staring directly at us. The older man said that they'd been driving by 45 minutes earlier and almost hit him as he was standing in the middle of the road. He theorized the man was possibly on drugs. They decided to take the long way home that night to see if the guy was still hanging around. Mind you, this was 45 minutes after they almost ran the guy over. Had he been watching me this entire time? I looked outside again to find he hadn't moved a muscle. He was positioned on the border of the streetlight's illumination. I noticed his jaw was moving like he was saying something. I asked the younger man to lock the deadbolt on the front door, literally my only line of defense in this situation. They both agreed to wait with me in the store while I contacted police. Until that moment, I maintained composure, trying not to make it obvious that I felt extremely vulnerable. Here I was, at the mercy of 3 complete strangers, hoping the 2 I had in front of me were genuinely there to help. When the dispatch operator confirmed that they had units on their way, I felt safe enough to end the call. I thanked the 2 men profusely and they walked out the door. After pausing for a moment, they turned around and came back inside. The younger one plainly stated, "Lock the door, he's coming this way." Then immediately ducks back out the door so I can lock myself in. As I flipped the deadbolt into position, I could see the dark figure moving toward the building at an intentioned pace, making it across the parking lot in about 10 strides. He tried opening the door but found it wouldn't budge. He asked the older man, "Where did the girl go?" Who then tried to buy me some time by saying I was in the bathroom and that I would be back in a minute. So this man, the possible assailant, walks around the corner towards the bathroom door and disappears behind the building. And of course, we didn't have cameras outside to keep employees safe on the job. The only 3 working security feeds happened to be all trained exclusively on where the cashier would stand. It felt accusatory. It was at this point when real fear began to set in, and I lost control of my composure. This unidentified man who had apparently been watching me for close to an hour was now laying in wait for me to exit the bathroom. I started to hyperventilate as thoughts of what his motivation could be. Had he been watching me before tonight? Was my store chosen at random, or did this guy just come here because he saw a small female at the register? Was he actually on drugs, or was he just mentally unstable enough for it to appear that way? Did he have a weapon on him? Or did he plan to use his bare hands for whatever he was going to do? I peeked out the window and saw the 2 gentlemen exchanging glances and muted discussion of how to proceed from there. Thankfully, a local police SUV tore down the street into the parking lot of the building next door, turning on his flashers and quickly coming to a stop. As soon as I was absolutely sure the man was gone, I sat on the curb outside, sucking every last drop of nicotine out of my cigarette I held in a trembling hand. As if I telepathically summoned her, my phone rings with a call from my best friend. She said she was thinking about me, and thought she would call to say what's up since she knew I would be bored. All I could respond with was, "Get here. Now." 20 minutes later, all of my roommates showed up in a pickup truck and stayed with me long enough to feel comfortable again. As anticlimactic as this ended, it could have definitely been a lot worse. I could have been robbed, raped, or murdered, or all 3, all because I wasn't paying attention. I'll never know the true will of that dark figure under the streetlight, and maybe that's for the best. I don't think I could easily get past knowing what could have lied in store for me. And I wish I could have got one of those gentlemen's contact information, so I can send a beef jerky bouquet or something manly that says thank you. So, dark figure under the streetlight, once you're out of the clink, let's never meet. Every Wednesday, my parents will leave the house to go on a date, and I'll be home alone during that time. I'm an only child, so they only need to worry about me and not another kid. Sometimes it gets lonely, but it makes things peaceful when it needs to be. When I was younger, they'd get a babysitter, but I'm old enough now to where they can trust that I won't run off or burn the house down or anything like that. And this has been normal and fine until recently. See, recently there's been something. I guess strange would be the most applicable word. Something strange has been happening. So, every Wednesday, they leave around 5 p.m., give or take a few minutes. They're pretty punctual about it, which I appreciate. So, every evening around 5, they'll say their goodbyes to me and leave. However, these last few weeks, there's been a knocking at the door. The first time it happened, it was exactly 6:45. I assumed that maybe it was a neighbor coming for something, or my parents just got home early, or even a delivery of sorts. However, when I opened the door, no one was there. A little odd, but probably just some neighbor kids trying to confuse me. 2 weeks later, it happened again, at exactly 6:45. There was a firm 3 knocks on the front door, but there was no one there when I checked. Again, kind of weird, but whatever. Since that second time, it's been happening every single week. Every Wednesday at 6:45 on the dot, I'll hear 3 firm knocks on the front door, but no one is there. I haven't brought it up to my parents because, well, it's probably not a big deal. Or, well, it could be. See, the reason I'm coming here to post about this isn't because, I'm freaked out over this thing that happens every week but is ultimately harmless. No, this last time was a little bit different, and I'm starting to get properly spooked. So, last week, Wednesday, August 17th, my parents are out on a date, as they do. I'm in the living room watching Bones. 6:45 is growing closer, so I have the volume a little low. My attention split between listening for the knocking and what's happening in the episode. 6:45 rolls around, and nothing. No knocking, no noise. Just the sound of my own heartbeat and the show on the TV. I waited for about 5 more minutes, thinking that maybe whoever kept bugging me was just a bit late. Nothing. This has been happening for several months, and now it just stops. Either the kid messing with me or whatever is going on got bored, or I've been just hearing things this whole time. It irked me out so bad that I just had to check. I opened the front door and looked around. The sky was a little gray as the sun was approaching the end of its day cycle, but the whole area around it was still lit. No one was nearby. However, upon looking down at the mat, I saw a small envelope. No return address, just Elijah, which is my name. This was hand-delivered and definitely wasn't there when my parents left, which didn't exactly fill me with reassurance. The handwriting was so neat. At first, I thought it was typed, but upon further inspection, I can tell it was definitely written on with a Sharpie or something. I knew my parents would be returning in a little over an hour, so I quickly went upstairs and put the envelope under my pillow so I can open it later that night when I wasn't alone in the house. That's a bit random, but I just felt unsafe, you know? I headed back downstairs, made sure the front door was locked, and went back to watch Bones and get my mind off of it. Thankfully, for my own peace of mind, nothing else happened that night. My parents came back at around 8, and I was able to get back upstairs without feeling too uneasy. I wish I could tell you I opened the letter right then, that I spent the whole night reading over whatever it said and coming to some conclusion. But the truth? I was too afraid. I only opened it yesterday. It read, Elijah, my middle plus last names. You have been so lonely recently. So very lonely. Do you enjoy my visits? If you find this letter before your parents do, I'll assume the answer is yes. You should let me know in some time. I'd love to visit. I'm officially freaked out now. Who is this person? How do they know my full name? Why is their handwriting so font-like? What is their fixation with me? Why do they always show up at the same time but never stick around, especially if they want to visit like they claim? I'm terrified. I haven't told my parents about this because I'm not sure if they take it seriously or not. After all, this all could just be an elaborate prank. Besides, it's not like this person's tried to properly break in or anything. My parents are going to be going on a date again in only a few days, and I'm terrified of what comes next. This is the first time the visitor has tried to make contact with me. Is it going to be different next time?
About 3 days ago, when my mother had left to meet my grandparents who lived abroad, my brother decided to celebrate his summer freedom by going to a local market and picking up a number of bootleg games for our PlayStation 2. We'd had the console equipped with a chip that enabled us to play Fate games, since the originals were far too expensive to keep buying. That night, we decided to sit down and play one of the games. It was supposed to be a copy of Silent Hill 2, but when we popped the CD into the console, we realized that it was actually a regular DVD with some videos on it. My brother and I, along with a friend of ours who was present, decided to watch the first video and see how entertaining it was, with the resolution that, in the morning, the DVD would be taken back to the guy who sold it to my brother in the first place. The first video was a 10-minute shot of a secluded road. It seemed to be extremely late, and in the shot, which looked like it had been shot really late at night, there was a pair of young women. They seemed a bit tipsy, and the camera followed them at a distance as they walked around the neighborhood, then finally into a building. The next clip was far more unnerving than the next. 2 hands were using a lock-picking set to try and open a door. All 3 of us watching inhaled sharply as the lock clicked and the door swung open.
There was an unsettling silence as the camera person slid into the house quietly. As the camera panned to record the living room, the person behind the camera began to pant heavily. They then began to make their way into the house. Having found the bathroom, they walked inside, still breathing heavily, then zoomed in on one of the sleeping woman's face. We recognized her as one of the tipsy women from the earlier video. A hand bearing a knife suddenly appeared on the screen and began caressing the sleeping woman's cheek with the knife. The other hand pulled the covers back and started to grope the woman. The knife slowly slid down from the woman's cheek to her throat. At this time, the camera person was breathing heavily. Then the video ended. There were more videos of women being followed and then of houses being broken into. We guessed that the houses were probably those of women that the voyeur had been following. We watched all of them, getting more and more freaked out, until I realized the woman being followed in the last video was my mother. Judging by her clothes, it had been shot a few days ago, probably the very day she had left for the airport. I began to panic. There was still lots of space on the DVD, which meant that if the voyeur had broken into my house, the evidence would have been on the disc. I began to panic. My mother had been gone for only 2 weeks, and I was so shaken that I asked my brother's friend if my brother and I could stay at his house. He readily agreed. The next morning, the three of us had returned to my apartment filled with apprehension. The lock did not appear to have been tampered with, and I had to unlock the door to enter. The house looked exactly as we had left it yesterday night, scattered crisp packets and all. I was about to heave a sigh of relief before I saw the message above my bed. In what appeared to be blood, someone had written, in capital letters, "It pains me that both of the ladies of this house have denied me an audience. It pains me so much that I bleed." I called the police immediately, but upon arrival, they concluded that the blood was some scarlet nail polish that had been taken from my dresser, and tried to brush it off as a prank played on me by my brother and his friend. "Boys will be boys," said the female officer to me before she left. But I was so disturbed that I decided to stay at my brother's friend's house until my mother got home. However, I decided to take the DVD with me as proof, and to set up an old laptop in my bedroom that had a webcam, linking it to my personal laptop with Log Me In so I could see if anyone broke in again. Log Me In lets me remotely access my laptop I sync with my regular laptop. I see the desktop of that computer and use any of the programs, including the webcam. Today evening, as I was accessing my laptop and watching the webcam feed, I saw a shadow on one of the walls. Then a new window popped up, indicating that someone was using the laptop simultaneously and had inserted a flash drive into one of the USB ports. I tried to shut the laptop down, but the other person using my laptop opened Windows Explorer to play a movie file on the flash drive. The video was of me walking from my house into my brother's friend's bungalow with my luggage. All of a sudden, the video player was minimized, and in the webcam feed, I could see another message beneath the first one above my bed. It read, "You dared to keep what is mine. I shall come to claim something of yours in exchange. You will bleed like me." Tonight, my brother's friend's parents are out at a dinner party. I can hear the front door clicking open, which is strange, because my brother and his friend are sound asleep on the second. I was 12 and my older sister and I were home alone for the weekend. I was waiting for a friend to pick me up, and getting restless. There was a knock on the door. Thinking it was her, I ran to answer it without checking through the peephole. A man was standing there with a clipboard and said he needed to check our gas meter. I was entrenched in the disappointment of my friend still not having arrived, so just told him, "Yeah, sure, whatever you need to do." I didn't notice at the time, but he wasn't dressed as a city official. He had on a green and purple shirt with bold stripes like the host of Blue's Clues. He came in and immediately went up the stairs to where our bedrooms were and walked into the open door of my room. The typical girly girl room with pink and glitter. Thank God, my sister came down the stairs at almost the exact moment. She said, "Oh, is that Daphne's dad? Why is he going upstairs?" And I complained about how Daphne wasn't here and was going on about how unreliable she was when my sister cut me off. Wait. If Daphne isn't here, who is that? I said. He's here to read the gas meters. Her face turned white. She flung open the front door and dragged me out, hand clamped over my protesting mouth. She said, "Our gas meters are outside." Neither of us had a cell phone. It was the 60s, and obviously we weren't going back in the house to call the authorities on the landline phone. Then my ever-resourceful sister had a stroke of genius. A man was walking right by our house, and she motioned him over. She called, loudly, into the house. "Oh, Dad, it's good you're home. A man from the city is here to read the gas meters upstairs." And just like she'd hoped, this man on the street said, "What are you talking about?" The man in the striped shirt bolted out of the house. The man on the street asked us repeatedly if we were okay, if we needed him to stay and wait in the yard with us until our parents came home. He was very sweet. We were so startled that we barely thanked him before slamming and locking the doors and windows. As irate as my sister was that I let someone in the house, she begged me not to call the authorities, because my parents left her in charge and she worried she'd be in trouble. I didn't want to catch any heat from carelessly allowing some guy in, so I was on the same page. 3 weeks later, a girl in our community went missing. Same MO. She was home alone and authorities found the door open and no signs of forced entry. My sister and I discussed our options, but deep down we knew we had no choice but to come clean. We told the police everything. I don't know if it ever helped, but they did tell us they had reason to believe it was the same man. They also tracked down the man who helped us on the street. Turns out we already knew him. He worked in the butcher shop. We just didn't recognize him. He was lifelong friends with the family after that. Our parents were mortified. They weren't angry with us, just glad we were okay. Though they did review the rules of caution and didn't leave us home alone for a while. They found the girl and said she'd been held for a few days and then burned alive. They never caught the man, but fear not. He was in what appeared to be his early 30s in the 1960s, so in any case, he has to be dead by now. I just thank God every day for my sister's resourcefulness and quick action. Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night, as my friends and I were quite the night owls. We loved the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the roads or the path we frequented. Even when using main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out so late in such a rural area. And you could see and hear them coming from very far away due to their headlights and the noise of the vehicle disrupting the peaceful silence of the night. We were really into it at the time, and would often ride our boards for miles and miles, sometimes not arriving home until the sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads to take one of our favorite hidden routes. It began with a narrow, paved path that was the only piece of land separating two sides of a long lake. It would often sink under due to rain, and we wanted to seize the opportunity to use it before it rained and went underwater again. It was roughly 2 miles long and was extremely relaxing to ride through due to the scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to continue moving and turn into a very close path that leads directly into a densely wooded wilderness preservation. As we came up to the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what appeared to be a tiny moving ball of dim light down there. It moved so strangely, it was extremely difficult to make out what it was. Rather than shine our flashlight down, we curiously watched it for a few moments, whispering to each other about what it could possibly be. All at once, that small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud revving sounds, overwhelming our senses that had become accustomed to the dark and silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off the path into a very dark, very overgrown hole in the side of a hill overlooking where we had just came from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout of this hill, hoping the plants and darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was happening out there. We watched our pursuers right up to where we had originally been standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4-wheelers, and 2 on full-size motorcycles. They were yelling at each other about something, but we couldn't make out what they were saying due to the distance we had covered. We felt safe enough to whisper very softly to each other and speculated who these people could be. Our first thought was they might be park rangers of some kind, although we had never seen one here in the many times we had been through. And honestly, we doubted that this country had the budget or even the desire to have anyone patrol the deep woods at night. Besides that, these men were on vehicles entirely inappropriate for the paved bike trails, and they were very angry about something. They called out to us for a while, yelling things like, "We know you're out there," and "We can see you, come on out." We stayed silent and decided to call their bluff instead of running. Eventually, we clearly heard one of the men yell, "Find them now," and smash a bottle. That had erased any hope that we had that these people were just park rangers. We watched them split up, each of them going a different way down the series of paths on their vehicles, including the path we came from. It took us what felt like ages to even move. We were frozen in terror inside that dugout, watching the lights from the vehicles travel through the woods in paths, one of them already coming full circle and passing the point he started from. I thought about calling for help, but I was too afraid to open my phone in fear that even the smallest amount of light would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach their furthest distance yet, we finally summoned the nerve to try to get up to run somewhere far enough from these people to safely make a call. We ran as hard and as fast as we could through the woods. Since their headlights gave away their location on these paths, we would hide again whenever we felt they were getting too close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woods became less dense, and the fear I felt waiting for one of them to drive past us while basically only being covered in leaves and plants may still be a match to this day. Finally, we emerged from the woods onto the intersection of 2 main roads, far from where we started. We ducked down into the ditch to call for help. When I opened my phone, I noticed I had recent missed calls from one of our other friends, Connor, who we were supposed to meet up with after our longboard excursion. I called him and frantically asked where he was. Luck was with us again. He hadn't given up on our plans despite us ignoring him. He was only a few miles away, already heading in our direction. I gave him the names of the 2 streets we were near the corner of and explained that we needed picked up right away. He agreed to speed over to us while Justin and I waited in hiding. Thankfully, Connor arrived before any of those men did. We bolted into the back seats of the car, yelling for him to get out of there, and he took off. Relief doesn't begin to describe what I felt being safely driven home after everything I had just experienced. After explaining everything that happened to Connor, we ended up just moving on with our night and decided not to call the police. We figured they would be gone by the time any officer made it out there, and that we would only be putting ourselves at risk by admitting to breaking the law by taking those paths so late at night. I still have no idea what happened or who those people were. I've been told all kinds of theories from friends and family that have heard this story. Some think that we walked right up into a huge drug deal. Justin and I later admitted to each other that when the revving started and we couldn't see, our minds both went straight to chainsaw-wielding horror movie serial killer. So I suppose it could have been much worse. Frustratingly enough, whatever those men thought we saw that made them want to catch us so badly, we never actually saw. We'll never really know, I suppose. I live in a fairly quiet road in the countryside in England. My mom works nights, and it's just me and her and my small dog. I'm 5'4" and look about 15. Also, I am female. It was a dark Wednesday night, around 10 o'clock at night, and I just got back from babysitting. I couldn't be bothered to cook, so I decided I'd order pizza. I ordered the pizza online. About 20 minutes later, the door goes and I open it. It was the pizza delivery man. He was about 6 foot tall, bald, and around 45, maybe 50 at a push. I smile and say thank you, and go to take my pizza from him. As I go to reach my pizza, the man, instead of handing me my pizza, takes a step back so the pizza box is out of my reach. "Hi, my name is Danny," he said, instantly. I could tell something was off about Danny. I couldn't put my finger on why, but he gave me the creeps. At this point, I just really wanted my pizza. It had been a long night, and I wasn't in the mood of a chit-chat, but not wanting to be rude, I replied, "Hi, Danny." Danny then smiled and said, "Do you want to save money on your gas and heating?" I had no idea what to reply, so I said, "I guess so." Danny then pulled out a bunch of leaflets from his back pocket. Danny really did seem very happy at this point and said, "Brilliant. Well, I'll come over sometime and we can have a chat about some deals. My number is written down on the back of this leaflets, so give me a call." I really didn't know what to say at this point, so I just nodded and took the leaflets from him. Danny then hands me my pizza, gives me a massive smile, and says, "Okay then, I'll see you very soon." At this point, I was pretty creeped out, and just shut the door as quickly as I could. I shoved the leaflets on the side, and didn't think more about Danny. I was just about to lock up and go to bed. It was around 11:30, and my dog starts going mental at the front door. My front door has a large panel of frosted glass, so as I was making my way towards the door to check out why my dog was going mental, I could see someone was standing at my front door. As I approached the front door, I shouted out, "Hello?" I was pretty nervous at this point because I knew it wouldn't be my mom coming home, and I couldn't think of anyone else it could be. I called out hello again. This time, I was much closer to the door and could see through the frosted glass. The figure was much taller than me. I called out, "Hello?" for the third time, and as I was reaching to open the door, the figure turned and ran off down the pathway from my house. I thought about opening the door, but I was kind of scared, so decided against it. I went to bed and didn't think about it anymore, or about Danny. Around 3.5 weeks later, I got a text from an unknown number. It was around 11 o'clock in the morning, and I was just getting ready to go to work. I work at a nursery. I checked the text and read, "Put the kettle on. I'll be around in 10, smiley face." I replied saying, "I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong number." I instantly received a text back saying, "No, I don't. It's me, Danny. I want to talk about my business deals with you." I nearly dropped my phone. I was so scared I was home alone yet again and didn't know what to do. I called my dad and told him the current situation. He told me to give him Danny's number and he would call Danny and tell him to leave me alone, then call me back. I gave my dad Danny's number and waited for him to call me. My dad called me back after 10 minutes and told me that he had spoke to Danny, and the conversation went like this. "Hello. Hello, is that Danny speaking?" "Yes. How can I help?" "My daughter has just called me saying you text her put the kettle on. She's not interested in whatever you're trying to sell her, and I'd appreciate it if you deleted her number." "Well, I haven't just texted your daughter. I sent a group text to a number of my business contacts. If you've sent a group text to a number of people, how do you know who my daughter is?" "I won't text her again. How did you get her number?" Danny hangs up. My dad said that he tried to call Danny back, but he had been putting the phone down on him. I felt a little bit better and carried on getting ready for work. My dad told me to call him back if Danny texts me again. Around 5 minutes later, my dad called me back saying Danny had called him back. Danny had told my dad that he knew I worked at a nursery and did babysitting on the side. He told my dad that he had gotten my number off a babysitting website. My dad asked Danny how he knew that I went babysitting, and Danny had told my dad that I had told him. This was of course a complete lie. I told my dad this, and he tried to call Danny back, but he didn't pick up again. My dad assured me that he has firmly told Danny to leave me alone and hopefully I wouldn't hear him again. It's been a week and so far I haven't heard anything from him. I did think about contacting the pizza company he works for, but decided against it, as I didn't want to make him lose his job, as he does know where I live.
So I'll give some backstory on this. The house that I'm currently living in has an attic, and I have lived in this house for the past 8 years.
since I was 13 years old. One night, during a bad winter, where it was constantly raining and had strong winds, I hear boxes being moved in the attic. I freak out and lay awake the whole night, listening to these weird sounds coming from the attic. In the morning, I confronted my parents, asking if it was them. They both denied it and have no reason to go into the attic. They only go into it around Christmas time, because that's where we store the tree. Christmas decorations and stuff we don't use but don't want to throw away. I told them I heard noises, and both brushed me off and claimed I was just hearing things. The next night, I hear the sounds again, and the next night, and the night after, for the whole week. I told my friends at school, and they said someone must be in my attic. I told them it was impossible. The only way into my attic is by grabbing the ladder from the shed in the garden, coming into the house, and next to the laundry, there's a hole with a panel covering it, and that's how you get into the attic. After that week, when the weather cleared up and I didn't hear any more noises coming from the attic, I simply forgot about it, until I forgot my key one day. I called my dad, who was at work, and asked him if there was a spare key hidden somewhere I could use to get in. He told me there's a way of getting into the attic via the roof. He told me about a large panel on the roof that could be removed and you can get onto the attic. It is also quite easy to get onto the roof, and my younger brother has done many times with ease to rescue our cats or balls that have ended up there. My blood went cold. Someone could have gotten into the attic. Someone could have been in our attic for a week. And then a dark thought crossed my mind. What if he was still in the attic? I noped out hard and walked around the neighborhood for 3 hours instead, while waiting for my dad to come home when he did. I told him again about that week. I heard noises in the attic and how he could have gotten in. Again, he brushed me off. The next few days were filled with the occasional horror moments. I have 2 glass doors in my room that face the backyard, and we have lights on motion sensors in the garden. One night, while I was sleeping, my dog asleep next to me, and my back to the glass doors, my room was suddenly flooded with light. Someone or something was in the garden. I didn't think much of it. Maybe a stray cat, I thought. Then as when my dog started growling, I froze. I had never heard him growl before, and that's when I heard the tapping on the glass door. I wanted to cry. I was terrified if whoever was tapping on the glass wanted in, the glass wasn't going to stop him. The tapping continued for a few more minutes. I lay still, pretending to be asleep. Then I heard the doorknob being tested, and then my dog started barking, really deep and menacing like. Whoever was there fled. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, scared he was going to come back. In the morning, my dad yelled at me due to the dog barking waking him up. I cried and told him about what had happened. Once again, he brushed me off. Another time when we changed the locks because my brother had lost his wallet with his keys in them, and our address was in his wallet. My dad gave me my new key for the front door. I put it on my bed and went shopping with my dad and brother. When I came back, it was gone. I searched everywhere. It never turned up. I ended up taking the spare key my dad had hidden in the garden and pretending it was my main. He would later put another key in the garden, which was hidden under my dog's bed. Other things have happened, but I think I have given enough backstory. This was about 2 months ago. My dad travels for work sometimes. When he does, my brother stays with our mom, and I look after the house and the animals. My dad had been gone for 5 days when this happened. I had left the main computer on, and it was just on the Google homepage. I went to bed and woke up 2 hours later. My stomach was killing me. I rushed to the bathroom and threw up. I had made a bit of a mess, so I went to the kitchen to grab a mop and bucket. That's when I saw the computer screen on. Curious, I went over to look at it and saw it was on YouTube, on a random music search page with the music typed into the search bar. I was freaked out, like, what the fuck? I clicked back and it went on a few different music things before going on a website of a uni my brother was considering going to, and I had taken him to the open day only a few weeks ago. Then I clicked back again, and it went on my email. Then it went to my uni homepage.
I was beyond freaked out. All I could think was someone was in my house. They had used my computer and gone searching for all this stuff. But why? I quickly grabbed a knife and headed to the main living room, which is next to the front door. I called my best friend, who lived a 30-minute drive away, and she told me she was coming to pick me up. I searched the living room while on the phone with her, and I told her if I screamed to call the police. After making sure the living room was safe, I paced waiting for her. My cats were freaked out and were hiding. When she arrived, we searched my house. I violently was kicking open doors and yelling if someone was in the house, I would stab them. There was no one inside the house. I was still freaked out, and my best friend told me I was spending the night with her at her house. I felt bad leaving my animals, but I couldn't bring them due to her having dogs that didn't like cats and could be aggressive with my dog at times. As we were leaving, a thought hit me. What if the person was in the attic? My best friend told me no way we were searching the attic and grabbed me. I didn't call the police, and my dad arrived home the next day. I told him what had happened last night. He laughed at me and once again brushed me off. I do believe that there is, or was, someone living in my attic. I'm very scared to be left alone overnight. I will update if anything happens, and I do plan on moving out next year. This happened a long time ago. At the time, I was living alone in a first-floor apartment. My girlfriend had been sick at the time and ended up in the hospital dealing with a rare disease. She recovered fine from it, but during those weeks, my life was pretty much go to work, go to the hospital to be with her, come back to the house for dinner, and then bed. It was a Friday night, and I was alone, so I decided to distract myself by reading and watching some videos on YouTube. Hours passed, and at 3 a.m., I was in bed with my iPad in hand, almost falling asleep. Then I heard it. I knew that sound pretty well. You see, outside, right in front of my bathroom door, there was a long corridor that leads directly to the kitchen. This apartment was in a building built in the 50s, and the kitchen door was old and had become slightly bent. That meant that whenever you turned the doorknob to open the door, it would snap out of its place with a distinct clack sound. A lot of thoughts ran through my mind in that moment. Had I dreamt it was in my semi-sleeping state? Or maybe the sound was real, but what happened was that the doorknob internal mechanism broke and it opened by itself. Or, of course, maybe someone was in my house and they had just opened the door. At this point, my heart was racing, and I started considering my options. I had a broomstick next to my bed. You may ask why I had it there, and to be honest, I had it exactly because I lived alone and thought one day I might be in a situation like this, where I would need a weapon. My girlfriend even used to joke about it, but I guess my paranoia was now paying off in the most unfortunate of situations. So I decided I was going to take the stick in one hand and grab my cell phone on the other. I would open my bedroom door while calling 911, and if no one else was in the apartment, I would just apologize to the operator on the other end of the line and explain the situation. However, back in those days, my cell phone wasn't yet a smartphone, and it had this feature I found interesting. If you pressed on a couple of specific keys, it would start ringing like someone was calling you. It was meant to be used when you wanted to simulate you were getting a call to get out of a boring conversation or a tough situation. Clumsily, I pressed on one of those keys and the phone started ringing. I quickly shut it up, but now it had become clear inside the apartment that I was awake. If someone was outside my bedroom, they certainly heard it. What was going to happen? I stopped for a few seconds to hear my surroundings. Nothing. It was dead quiet. I decided to continue with my plan. I dialed 911 with one hand, raised the broomstick with the other, and quickly opened the door. As soon as I did that, someone sprinted in front of me in the corridor and quickly got into the kitchen, closing the door behind them. I screamed, "Hey!" and started pursuing, but a split second later, I thought, stop. What if there's someone else in the apartment? What if another intruder sneaks up on you from behind? In front of me was the corridor to the kitchen, but on my left was another corridor that led to the living room and office. The office had the light on, so the intruder had been there, but I didn't know if he had company.
I took a step back into the entrance of my room so that I wouldn't be caught off guard. "Sir, are you there?" The 911 operator was calling me on the phone. I quickly explained to him what was happening, gave him my address, and he told me the police was on its way. They had a patrol car nearby, so I should just wait. Then he hung up. The apartment was dead silent. I was terrified. There were only 3 things that I had been able to notice in the intruder. He had a light-colored sweatshirt with horizontal black lines, dark hair, and he smelled really bad. In fact, the smell was still in the apartment and I could still sense it. The police arrived after 7 or 8 minutes, which felt like ages. The apartment door was next to the bedroom, so I managed to quickly approach it and unlock the door to let them in. I explained what had happened to the police, and they said that they should go through the whole apartment and check every single hiding place. They had seen situations before, where a burglar had hid himself for a long period of time, even after the house owners had called the police, to later attack them. The apartment wasn't that big, so it was easy to conclude that no one was hiding there. In the kitchen, it was obvious what happened. I left one of the windows open, and next to it, on the outside, there was a large drain pipe along the wall. The intruder used that pipe to climb to my window and get in. The police left to look around the neighborhood for someone matching the description of the sweatshirt I described. While they were gone, I could still smell that horrible odor the intruder had left in the apartment. After around 20 minutes, they came back. They couldn't find anyone. The burglar was long gone. Luckily, he didn't have the chance to steal anything while he was in my apartment. But the audacity, he must have seen the light on in my bedroom through the edges of the door, and still he tried walking past it to steal something from the office. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I went to the garden in the back to try to find any further clues about the intruder, but couldn't find anything. A neighbor in the building next door was at the window and I called out to her. I told her what had happened. She just smiled and said, "Well, welcome to the neighborhood. We all have stories like that in this place. You should never leave your windows open, and maybe you should consider getting some bars to protect them." The next day, I bought a motion alarm and installed it in the kitchen. I never had another experience like that in the apartment, but to be honest, I never slept the same way in that bedroom. Traumatized by those events. At night, I would fear hearing them again and the sound of the kitchen door snapping out of its place. A few years later, I moved out to a larger apartment in another neighborhood. This time, it was on a 7th floor, so much harder for intruders to get in through the windows. So, to the intruder that came into my apartment and smelled really bad, let's not meet ever again.